I'm not the kind of man who raises his voice in conference rooms. I build my days out of quiet, fix the deck before the rain, answer emails before the inbox turns feral, double check the numbers so no one has to ask me twice. If you met me in the kitchen at work, you'd say I'm steady. If you sat 2 rows behind me in a meeting, you might not notice me at all, unless my name shows up on a slide someone else is presenting. That's the part that's hard to explain to people who've never had a boss like mine. The humiliation isn't loud, it's calibrated. It's a joke that lands because everyone understands who's allowed to laugh. Greg likes laughter, he collects it. He talks with his hands, owns the table, makes eye contact the way a spotlight does. He'll put a palm on your shoulder when he needs a prop and lift it when he's finished. He calls it mentorship. Mostly it's harvest. Give him a room and a deadline and he'll strip mine anyone who isn't wearing armor. I lasted because I'm good at the quiet parts. Ad ops, budget pacing, pre-buy models. The kind of work that makes creative possible but never goes on a storyboard. I let Greg polish my decks, which meant swapping my fonts for his, and leaving his initials in the file name. I told myself it didn't matter. Rent got paid. My mother stopped asking if the industry was stable. When the intern started 2 weeks ago, Ethan, computer science junior, handshake like he was afraid of breaking something, I told him 2 rules. Document everything, and don't try to impress Greg. Impress the numbers. They don't change the story after it's told. The day it broke wasn't special. Tuesday, weather like wet paper. The weekly all-hands started late because Greg likes to arrive after everyone else has practiced paying attention. I sat near the back with Ethan and a product manager whose coffee said, "World's okayest mom." On the wall, the screen showed the client logo that pays for most of our office fruit, and the words Q3 turnaround strategy in Greg's favorite condensed font. I recognize my charts like you recognize your own handwriting when someone else traces it. Greg opened with a joke about Mondays on Tuesdays, waited for the room to laugh, then explained the new approach for the account that had been bleeding spend into performance purgatory since spring. He walked them through the pacing model I'd built last weekend while a pot of pasta went uneaten. The reallocation that cut the burn in non-converting cohorts by 14%, the inventory buys that matched real demand instead of the calendar. He paused before each slide long enough to make it feel like a reveal. He said, "I was up late," and let it float there. I watched people nod. It wasn't anger I felt. It was that chill you get when you step into a church in summer. The room felt colder than it should have been. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes flicking between the screen and Greg's mouth. He'd been in the repo when I pushed those files. He'd seen the timestamps and the comments where I'd tagged him, explaining why a CPM that looks cheap is sometimes the costliest thing in the room. He whispered, "That's your..." then stopped, like he'd touched something hot. I don't need applause, but I do need air. I took a breath and it tasted like someone else's cologne. Halfway through, Greg pivoted to culture, his favorite topic when there's blood on the floor. He said the words he always says: ownership, hunger, grit, family. He paused to make sure we were still there. Then he smiled like an actor who's found the camera. "And on that note," he said, "I want to talk about what happens when people don't step up." He clicked, and a new slide appeared, my audit checklist, stripped of my initials with a red circle around an item I hadn't checked because the client's pixel had failed and the vendor hadn't fixed it yet. "This," Greg said, tapping the screen with the kind of theatrical patience that comes from practice, "is the difference between good and great. We can't have missed boxes when we're fighting for a quarter." The room did that thing rooms do when they smell trouble. Chairs squeaked. Someone exhaled into a lid. Greg didn't say my name. He didn't have to. He looked toward the back, left of the door where I always sit. "Some people keep their heads down and hope someone else cleans it up," he said. "That's not who we are." I felt 30 pairs of eyes move like a school of fish. The checklist lived in a shared folder where anyone could see the audit notes, including Greg, who'd signed off on the hold because the vendor owed us a make good. He knew the line wasn't missed. He knew why it wasn't checked. He also knew what a lesson looks like when you stage it right. Ethan shifted. The product manager with the okayest mom cup looked at me with a small, involuntary sympathy, the kind people offer before they remember it might be expensive. I kept my face neutral. You keep your dignity the way you keep your temper, by deciding before you need it. You want to say something? Greg asked, eyebrows up, the performance of generosity. I'm happy to hear from the team. There's a trap in that question. If you stay silent, you prove him right. If you answer, you're defensive. I said what was true and small. We held the event tracking until the vendor restored the pixel. You approved the hold yesterday at 4. Greg smiled like I'd given him a cue. See, that's the kind of detail that sounds right in a vacuum, he said. But clients don't live in vacuums. They live in results. He looked back at the room. We all need to think bigger than our checklists. A laugh, low and safe, came from the front. Greg turned that way and let it spread. I imagined him at home practicing where to aim his eyes so the room would follow. It was so smooth, I almost admired it. He had taken a true thing, bent it a few degrees, and made my caution sound like smallness. He had given everyone a story in which my accuracy was the villain and his urgency the hero. People like those stories because they end with someone else changing. I felt my jaw set, then loosen, because nothing good happens. After a jaw sets in a room where the mic belongs to someone who likes the sound of himself. I could have reminded him that his new approach came from my deck, that his notes the night before were punctuation and not prose. I could have said, in front of everyone, that leadership doesn't mean adding initials to the file name. I could have, but I work in a building where the elevator only stops on our floor with a badge, and badges are very easy to cancel. So I let the silence have me. I nodded once, the smallest motion that still counts as a reply, and Greg moved on like he'd solved a problem only he could see. He clicked to the slide with the projections, and the room relaxed into the comfort of numbers that climbed in the right direction. He said we were back on track. He thanked the team. He thanked the late nights. He thanked everyone who went the extra mile, which is a phrase that lets you thank yourself in public. When the meeting finally ended, chairs scraped, and people found reasons to walk the long way around my row. A designer patted my arm with the sort of touch you use on a stranger's dog. Hang in there, he murmured, which is what you say when you don't plan to be anywhere near the hanging. Ethan didn't move. He sat very still, his hands clasped, and then he stood with a care I hadn't seen from him before. In the corridor, he matched my pace without looking at me. That wasn't right, he said, voice low like we were in a library. I shrugged. The international signal for not here, not now. He swallowed. I took notes, he added, and then went the other way, like a small boat returning to a different shore. Back at my desk, the plant that refuses to die by the window looked healthier than it had any right to be. Someone had watered it. My inbox had multiplied. There was a message from Greg, great energy today, and a calendar invite for a one-on-one at 4. There was also a Slack from the client asking if we could share the new framework Greg had mentioned. I typed that we'd send a cleaned version by end of day and dragged my original file into a separate folder out of habit, the one I keep inside another one with a name only I understand. At 12:15, I microwaved leftovers that tasted like a decision I hadn't made yet. At 1:30, I fixed a tagging issue before it became a fire. At 2:45, I watched the rain start on the glass and thought about the first job I ever had, stocking shelves at a hardware store where the manager said thank you by not talking to you. I loved that job. Things either fit the slot or they didn't. No one applauded a bolt. At 3:58, Greg pinged. Grab a conference room. He arrived 3 minutes late in a shirt you wear when you've been photographed before. He sat, legs wide, ownership in posture form. Look, he began, generous again. I need you to understand something about optics. He explained that leadership often requires framing, that sometimes we say the thing that moves the room, and that no one is out to get you. If You don't make it personal. He said, "We're on the same team, and I trust your brain." He said all of it with a tone that suggested I should thank him for the lesson. I said okay because there are days when okay is the only complete sentence a person should spend. He smiled, stood, squeezed my shoulder like a stamp, and left with his reflection intact. I packed my bag at 6 because that's when I'm allowed to be a person again. In the elevator down, a woman from finance told me she liked my shoes. On the sidewalk, the rain had paused, leaving the city in that gray afterglow that makes everything look freshly painted. I walked to the bus because I needed the time. The route goes past a line of small restaurants, where people sit with their heads bent over screens and bowls. The smell of ginger and char and coffee oil followed me like a friend. On the ride, a kid laughed too hard at a video, then looked up, embarrassed, the way I used to when I thought my private life leaked into a public space. He caught my eye and grinned. I grinned back because it cost me nothing and bought him a second of relief. At home, I unlocked the door and listened to the quiet. I set my bag down, took off my shoes, and leaned both hands on the counter, like I was about to lift something heavy. The refrigerator hummed. Pipes clicked. The world did what it always does when you stop trying to name it. I don't mind being invisible. I mind being erased. There's a difference. One is a choice. The other is a theft performed with applause. I made dinner simple. Eggs, toast, a tomato that tasted like a memory of summer, and ate standing up because the chair felt like a reward I hadn't earned. When my phone buzzed, it was Ethan. He asked if I had a minute tomorrow morning before stand-up. He used a lot of words for a short question, the way careful people do when they're not sure if space exists for them. I typed yes and stared at the word until it looked like a hinge. The dishes could wait. I wiped the counter, turned off the kitchen light, and stood by the window long enough to see my own face settle. Somewhere between the office and the bus and the eggs, something had shifted. Not a plan, not a rage, just a line I could finally see, the one that runs between being useful and being used. I went to bed without rehearsing arguments I'd never say out loud, and the dark held like a promise I hadn't broken yet. The office smelled like burnt coffee and denial the next morning. Meetings started before anyone's caffeine worked, printers already jammed, and the air carried that mix of fake urgency and recycled air that comes free with open floor plans. Greg was in early, which meant something was brewing. He only showed up before 9 when there was an audience to manage or a problem to bury. I logged in, opened the project queue, and saw his follow-up notes on the deck he'd presented yesterday. My deck. They were all phrased like orders. Fix, adjust, restructure. Not please, not thanks. Just commands, each stamped with his initials as if he were editing scripture. At the bottom he wrote, "Let's train the intern on version control. He seems sharp. Could use real-world exposure." I stared at the line a little too long. Exposure. That's Greg's favorite word. He uses it the way other people use opportunity. Translation. Do the grunt work. Get no credit. Call it mentorship. When Ethan walked in, he looked different. Not nervous, composed. Like someone who'd slept badly but decided it didn't matter. He gave me a small nod, careful and deliberate, then sat 2 desks away and started typing. No greeting, no small talk, just quiet motion. 10 minutes later, Greg called across the floor. "Alex, you free for a quick sync?" That was another trick, making your name sound like a command. I walked over, notebook in hand, because that's what trained people do when the boss says sync. He smiled that teeth-white smile. "Hey, partner," he said loud enough for others to hear. "Didn't mean to single you out yesterday. Just gotta keep everyone sharp, you know?" It was performance art. I nodded once. Of course. He leaned back, fingers behind his head like the hero in a stock photo. "That intern of yours, bright kid. Quiet, but I like him. Think he's picking things up?" I could have said yes. I could have said nothing. Instead, something small in me snapped into clarity. "He notices things," I said. More than you think. Greg laughed, a sound too close to a bark. Good. Maybe he'll learn the ropes before the next presentation cycle. Then, with that smirk that made HR invisible, he added, maybe he'll even teach you a thing or two. The conversation was over before it started. I walked back to my desk. The air felt heavier, the kind of heavy that sits behind your ribs. I typed a few lines of code for an analytics tag and tried not to think about what Ethan had noticed. At 10:03, I got a Slack ping. Can you check your email? Sent something weird. It was from Ethan. I opened it. There was an attachment, an audio file. I hesitated before clicking, then put on my headphones. Greg's voice filled my ears, clear and close. It was yesterday's meeting, but not just the part in the room. The recording picked up the chatter after the meeting ended. Greg laughing, bragging. Yeah, I had to keep him humble. Guy's smart, but too safe. Needs to sweat. Laughter. Then another voice. Was that his model you used? Greg again. Technically, yes. But who's going to know? The guy's allergic to confrontation. I paused the audio. My pulse climbed in slow, steady beats. I looked around the office like someone might have seen me hear it. No one had. Ethan wasn't at his desk. I found him in the copy room, arms folded, eyes calm. You recorded it? I whispered. He shook his head. I set up a mic for meeting notes. You asked me to automate transcripts, remember? It caught the post-meeting, too. I remembered. You kept it? I figured you might need it someday. He didn't smile. Guess it's today. The thing about humiliation is that it doesn't vanish when it's over. It settles in your bones, waits there, becomes part of the way you move. Hearing Greg laugh about it didn't make it worse. It made it visible. I told Ethan to delete the file. He didn't move. You sure? Yes. He nodded but didn't delete it. If that's what you want. By lunch, Greg was holding another impromptu meeting in the common area, surrounded by people pretending to be busy. He thrived on those circles, the ones where everyone has to look engaged, but no one knows why. I sat 2 tables away, pretending to work through campaign metrics. He was talking to the new director from the Boston office, turning charm up to 11. Then, out of nowhere, he said it. You have to manage your people like performers. Keep them a little hungry. Too much comfort, and they stop being creative. The Boston director smiled politely. And you're the ringmaster? Greg laughed. Someone has to be. It was then Ethan looked up from his laptop and said, clearly enough for everyone to hear. Is that why you stole Alex's presentation? The room froze. No sound. Just the hum of the fridge by the snack bar. Greg's smile stayed frozen too long. The kind of pause you can't script. Excuse me? He said, tone half laugh, half threat. Ethan didn't blink. You presented his work as yours. I have the version logs and the recording. You called it keeping him humble. No one breathed. The director from Boston blinked once, twice. Someone dropped a pen. Greg turned toward me. Alex, is this your idea of a joke? I opened my mouth, but Ethan spoke first. No joke. I just thought honesty was part of the culture. A ripple of motion spread, people shifting, eyes darting. The silence wasn't empty, it was charged, the kind that means something's gone wrong. Greg's face went tight, that twitch in his jaw he hides under charm. My office! Now! He snapped and stalked off. Ethan didn't follow. He just shut his laptop and whispered, almost to himself, That's enough for today? I sat there, heart hammering, knowing that the room we'd just left would talk for weeks. My mind was already racing through consequences. His, mine, everyone's. When Greg stormed past 10 minutes later, phone pressed to his ear, he didn't look at anyone. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked small. Ethan passed my desk an hour after that. He didn't say anything, just placed a flash drive by my keyboard. Backup, he murmured. I didn't thank him, didn't know how. I just stared at that small piece of metal like it was a loaded weapon. That night, I walked home under a sky that looked bruised. I didn't check my phone, didn't open my laptop. Just stood in the dark kitchen and listened to the hum of the fridge again, the same sound that had filled the silence earlier. And then I realized something had shifted. The weight was moving, and not toward me. But that was just the beginning. Rumors travel faster than memos. By 9 a.m. the next morning, the office had already split into tribes, those who pretended not to know what happened, and those who pretended to be shocked that it had. No one said Greg's name out loud, but you could hear it in the quiet, like static under conversation. Every time his door opened, heads ducked. Every time a Slack notification pinged, shoulders tensed. He came in late, sunglasses indoors, coffee in hand, fake calm radiating like cologne. He nodded to no one, just walked straight into his office and shut the door hard enough to make the blinds tremble. I didn't see Ethan until noon. He was at his desk, typing like a man defusing a bomb. When I passed, he whispered without looking up. He called HR, twice. About you? About the data breach, he said, fingers still moving. He's trying to make it sound like I violated privacy. The irony's almost poetic. I stopped. You need to be careful. He finally looked at me, eyes steady. I am. That's why I sent the files to the compliance officer last night. I stared at him. You what? He shrugged, calm. The recording, the version history, the emails with timestamps. Everything. I didn't send them anonymously either. I CC'd myself. The floor seemed to tilt under me. Ethan, relax, he said softly. They won't fire me. They'll investigate first. And they can't bury this. Too many eyes saw it yesterday. That's when I realized Ethan hadn't done it for me. He'd done it because it was right. There was no grand gesture, no hero complex. Just an intern who refused to live in a world built on cowardice. The next 48 hours were slow chaos. HR started pulling people in one by one. Everyone came out pale. The compliance team requested access to shared folders, calendar invites, Slack logs, all the little trails Greg thought he'd erased by yelling louder than accountability. I kept my head down, stayed silent, kept working. I knew how corporate storms worked. Whoever speaks first becomes the lightning rod. But silence has power if you hold it long enough. By Friday, the mask started to slip. Greg's voice carried through his glass door, sharper, less controlled. You can't treat a misunderstanding like misconduct. Then quieter. Don't tell me about optics. I am optics. At 4 p.m., an all-hands meeting appeared on everyone's calendar. Mandatory, the subject line read. 15 minutes later, we were all in the common area. Chairs in rows, projector humming. HR director at the front, face set in that corporate version of grief that means paperwork is coming. Greg stood beside her, no sunglasses this time. Just that tight, forced smile of a man pretending to own the stage while it collapses under him. The HR director cleared her throat. We want to address a recent internal issue that's been brought to our attention. There have been discrepancies in project ownership and some breaches of conduct. Greg stepped forward like it was his cue. I'd like to clarify a few things. She stopped him cold. Greg, we'll handle this. The room went so still you could hear the air vents. HR continued. After review, it's clear that multiple presentations and proposals were submitted under false attribution. Additionally, certain employees were subjected to inappropriate conduct, including public humiliation and misuse of authority. She didn't name names. She didn't have to. Everyone looked at him. Greg opened his mouth, but no sound came out. For the first time, the man who lived for an audience had nothing left to perform. Effective immediately, she said, Mr. Hayes will be placed on administrative leave pending termination proceedings. Someone in the back gasped, a soft, involuntary sound. HR kept talking, but it was background noise. My eyes were on Greg. His jaw flexed. His hand twitched. You could see the calculation. Apology or anger? Fight or flee? He chose the only option left. Denial. This is a mistake, he said, voice trembling under the weight of forced calm. I built this team. You're firing the reason this place exists." No one responded. Even his usual chorus of sycophants stared at their shoes. Ethan was in the back, leaning against the wall, silent. Our eyes met for a second. He didn't look proud. He looked done, like a man who just finished carrying a heavy truth across broken glass. Greg turned to leave, but halfway to the door he stopped. "You," he said, pointing at me. "You think you win here? You think this makes you the hero?" I didn't move. I didn't answer. Because heroes need witnesses, and I didn't need either anymore. He waited. When silence didn't feed him, he walked out. Just a man stripped of his title, walking through the same doors he used to command. The sound of them closing was quieter than I expected. Afterward, people talked in whispers. Some congratulated me. Others avoided eye contact, afraid guilt was contagious. HR told me to stay available in case further clarification was needed. At my desk, Ethan dropped a file on my keyboard. "Clean versions," he said. "The original models with your name restored." I opened one. It felt strange, seeing credit in black and white. Like reading my own obituary and realizing it ended better than expected. "Why'd you do it?" I asked quietly. He thought for a second. "Because I'm tired of watching good people apologize for bad ones." He walked away before I could answer. That night, I stayed late. Not working, just sitting in the half-dark office, the glow of monitors painting empty chairs. The city outside hummed like a secret. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of Monday. I closed my laptop, grabbed my bag, and stood. The reflection in the glass wall looked older than I remembered, but lighter. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed Greg's office. Empty. Desk cleared, nameplate gone. On the wall, the space where his motivational quote poster had hung was just a pale rectangle now. Blank. Honest. I smiled once. Small, private, clean. They thought I'd stay quiet. They were wrong. It's strange how a place changes when the noise is gone. Same desks. Same coffee machine that burns everything it touches. Same fluorescent hum. But without Greg, the office felt different. Lighter, like someone had opened a window no one knew existed. People started talking softer, laughing more. The jokes didn't feel like weapons anymore. Even the air conditioning sounded less aggressive, like the building itself had exhaled. HR sent out the official statement Monday morning. Following internal review, Mr. Hayes has parted ways with the company. That phrase, parted ways, did a lot of heavy lifting. It meant they wanted it over, clean, quiet, no lawsuits. And so we moved on. They asked me to take over the client account he used to run. Temporary, they said, until they found someone permanent. But everyone knew what that meant. Titles move slow, but trust moves fast once you stop being afraid. When I walked into Greg's old office for the first time, it still smelled faintly like his cologne, that sharp, synthetic scent he used to announce himself before he spoke. I opened the window and let it drift out. The city air came in, thick and honest. On his desk, I found a stack of old printouts, scribbled notes, performance charts full of red lines. I almost threw them away, then saw one margin note in his handwriting. Control the room. People mistake fear for respect. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I folded the page once and dropped it in the shred bin. By noon, the company chat was already shifting back to normal. Memes, emojis, the usual digital noise. No one mentioned Greg anymore. That's the real death in an office. Not when they fire you, but when they stop saying your name. Ethan swung by my doorway holding 2 coffees. He'd been quiet all week. Low profile, no eye contact in meetings. Head down like someone who knows victory can be dangerous too. "You didn't have to get me one," I said. He shrugged. "You looked like you'd forget lunch." We sat across from each other, the hum of the computer filling the silence. "They offered me an extension," he said eventually, "for the internship." I nodded. "You earned it." He smiled, small but real. "You too." That was it. No speeches. No dramatic goodbyes. Just two people who'd walked through something ugly and didn't need to explain it. Later that week, HR sent me a calendar invite. Team recognition. I thought it was a routine meeting. It wasn't. The director from Boston joined the call. She thanked me for leadership under pressure, said my work had been instrumental in stabilizing the client account. I listened, polite, nodding where appropriate. Then she said the line that caught me off guard. It's not just what you built, it's what you refuse to destroy. Afterward, I turned off the camera, leaned back, and laughed quietly. The kind of laugh that doesn't need to prove anything. That night, I stayed in the office late again, but this time it wasn't out of dread. The city outside pulsed with its usual rhythm. Taxis, sirens, conversations leaking from open windows. Inside, the only sound was the low buzz of the monitors and my own breathing. I thought about Greg, not with anger, but with distance. The kind of distance that turns people into stories. Somewhere he was probably rewriting the version where he was the victim, where ambition justified cruelty. That's fine. Let him. Some stories need villains. Mine just needed an ending. At 8, I shut my laptop and walked out. The hallway lights flickered like they always did, indifferent to the human drama they'd witnessed. I passed the conference room where he'd humiliated me. The chairs were pushed in now, perfectly aligned. No echoes left. Outside, the air was cold and clean. A cab splashed through puddles on the corner. I watched the reflection of the building shimmer in the wet asphalt. A warped mirror of where I'd spent years pretending silence was the same as peace. It isn't. Peace is what comes after you speak. I walked home. No calls, no messages. Just the steady sound of my shoes on concrete. When I reached my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights right away. The dark didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. I cooked dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta this time. Ate slow. Checked the time once, out of habit, then smiled at how unnecessary it was. Ethan texted around 10. Client approved the rollout. They used your model. I typed back, good, it works. He replied with one line that stayed with me. Funny thing about truth, it doesn't need PR. I left the phone face down and stepped out onto the balcony. The city hummed below, the kind of endless, indifferent hum that used to drown me. Now it sounded like permission. The night air moved through my shirt. Somewhere in the distance, sirens faded. Someone laughed. Someone cried. The world didn't pause. It never does. But I did. Just long enough to breathe. Revenge wasn't what this was. It was restoration. Of balance. Of worth. Of voice. I didn't need an audience. I didn't need applause. All I needed was this. The quiet that finally meant peace. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it just sounds like silence.